This is the Out of Order podcast, cutting through the political chat.
Hello and welcome to the Out of Order podcast. I'm Grace.
And I'm Jack.
Good morning.
How are you?
I am very well, thank you very much.
Glad to hear it.
We're a bit out of sync this week.
We are, aren't we? We've left this a little bit late.
Yeah, so we're obviously recording Friday and PMQs are on Wednesday, so we've had a lot of time to reflect and gather our thoughts.
Forgotten it all already.
And pulled together the best bits for you. So, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Jeremy Corbyn was a bit on form this week, wasn't he? He was much better than last week, I thought.
Well, yeah, he only said one thing last week.
That's true, yeah. And to be fair...
The only way was up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And he did stick to the same kind of idea of just honing in on one issue this week, I think. A lot of it was focusing on NHS waiting times for cancer patients, A&E waiting times, targets especially that the Conservatives so like to trot out that they're setting these targets and, you know, we're going to aim to meet all these targets. Jeremy really honed in on those. We actually have a little clip of him getting quite angry, I believe, at Boris Johnson.
Okay, let's play that now, and
let's
that sets
that.
the mood
set
for
the
where
mood.
we're going with Jeremy's mood swings.
If he's really committed to fixing the crisis his government has created over the last decade, he should end the empty rhetoric and back our proposals to give the NHS the funding it needs, rather than putting into law an insufficiency of funding. The NHS is our most precious national institution. Fund it properly, that everyone can rely on it, those that cannot afford private health care.
See, this is the thing. Jeremy's in such a good position here because he's obviously not on the defence like Boris is, and this is his prime area to, you know, go in for attack. Social justice, NHS, national, like, this is his thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it's what Labour tried to make the election all about, as I remember. Obviously, the Conservatives were all kind of, we're going to be the party that solves Brexit. And Labour looking for a way to not talk about Brexit, really, was to talk about the NHS instead. I'm sure you remember Jeremy at that debate pulling out that pamphlet of stuff where he said that Boris Johnson was going to sell off the NHS to Donald Trump, and he got out live on stage. Yeah, this was really nice, you know, just to see Jeremy Corbyn get a bit animated and a bit passionate. I'm sure you could hear it in his voice there. Like, actually, there was a little bit of anger in there, wasn't there?
Yeah, definitely.
And that makes a lot of difference, I think, in the way he asks a question. He could ask it like we talk, or he could actually, you know, put a bit of passion into it and get a bit...
This is what he's good at, though.
Yeah.
He is good at, you know, really getting passionate. And come on, we've seen him through his two election campaigns. And definitely the first one, you saw this Jeremy Corbyn that we had on Wednesday. The Jeremy Corbyn that would go and stand on the stage at Glastonbury.
Yeah, right.
So, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
But let's talk about Boris's response. So, what was he promising?
Well, he continued to remind people that the Conservatives are the party of the NHS because they've been given this mandate, essentially. Although, obviously you can't measure what people voted for. You would assume that most people voted Conservative because they wanted to get Brexit done, to borrow the line from the Conservative Party. Whether people thought the Conservatives are genuinely the party of the NHS, or just now that the Conservatives are in government, they are de facto the party of the NHS because they're in power, you can't really measure that. But he kept reminding Jeremy Corbyn that Labour were the ones who wrecked the economy in 2009, a full 11 years ago.
And there's been a whole load of Conservative austerity since then. But I really liked Jeremy's little dig when he turned round and when another hospital has been closed to pay for the rebuilding of the hospital in Leicester that Boris was banging on about.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of nice to see him tripping him up, and holding him to account.
That's what he's there for, isn't it? This is what the point of PMQs is.
I didn't feel like he did last week. I didn't think he did it properly.
It was quite soft, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He kind of let things go, I thought, yeah.
Definitely.
Have we got the clip of him continually reminding Jeremy Corbyn that the Conservatives are the party that look after the economy?
Well, we'll play that for you now, and this is kind of, what is it called? Stewardship?
He used the words careful stewardship and careful management to describe what the last 10 years of devastating austerity were.
So is that austerity by the back door continuing?
That is how you spin austerity, essentially, yeah. It's how you make austerity sound good.
Okay, so we're going to listen to Boris Johnson now talking about careful management of the economy and what the Conservatives plan to do.
It is this government whose careful stewardship of the economy has led to record employment, record low unemployment, which delivers the tax revenues that enables us to pay for the whole of society.
Question.
Yes.
If they've had such good stewardship of the economy, they've created so much revenue for them to reinvest, etc., as he was before saying, and he continued to reiterate throughout PMQs, why is he then noting back to the problems in the NHS being due to the Labour government 11 years ago? If they've had such careful stewardship of the economy over this period, why are we still in this position? Why is privatisation of the NHS even on the table if they've done so well at protecting it?
That's a very good question, and frankly, become an MP and ask him that, please, because I'd like to know. The point
He
about
probably wouldn't understand me. Oi up, Boris, mate.
That's jokes. The point about Labour, I think, is fairly straightforward because it's an easy stick to bash Labour with, and it has been for the past 10 years, and it resonates. People remember, that austerity and that crash of 2009 was in our lifetime. So if you say to people who crashed the economy in 2009, people just say Labour, regardless of whether it's true or not, or regardless of actually what happened. It's been very effectively pinned on the Labour Party by the Conservatives, and now it's stuck.
So how long is it going to take them to, drop that brand? It's obviously...
Well, the point was meant to be that Jeremy Corbyn would help do that because there was a shift away from the new Labour of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown that were in power when that crash happened. But it doesn't really seem to have gone, does it? I don't think it resonates in the same way that it used to. Because it's not, we're not living through new Labour yet, are we? We are away now from the new Labour concept of centre-left government.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why, people put up with the austerity policies for as long as they have, because they saw it as necessary to get back from where we were from, because that's how it was spun to us.
Absolutely.
And now it kind of feels like, well, we've been doing this for over a decade. How much longer are we going to continue to do this for? How much longer do we have to recover for? Like, how many Conservative governments are going to make us suffer for this Labour crash? Well, they're all failing us, all of them.
Is that your message for the day?
Yes,
everybody. Is failing
Don't
us.
Trust anybody.
Question everything.
Yes, question everything and be impartial.
As we try our best
to be. So do you want to go on to your main standout points, to your main questions that really stuck with you, other than this whole NHS debate that we were having continually through it? It was brought up a few times in different questions. What were your...
Probably too predictably, but there was a question on the environment.
Oh, wow.
And
imagine the Green Party member, that being his main point.
Honestly, right, you should have seen that coming. The amount of times there isn't a question about the environment on PMQs is staggering. Because I can't remember the last time there was a question about the environment on PMQs. There wasn't asked by Caroline Lucas, who was the only Green MP in Parliament. This question was about the Prime Minister has created a new Office for Environmental Protection. And the question was, will the Prime Minister give that office powers to fine the government if it fails to live up to its promises? To which Boris spun by saying that this Conservative government, since it came into power, has managed to reduce CO2 emissions by 42% on 1990 levels. So obviously not just his government, since it's only been in power really since 2010, or if you consider the entire Conservative government has only really been in power since 2010.
I was going to say, if he's done that since December, then wow.
Very impressive, right?
Give him a Nobel Prize.
So, yeah, also he's forgetting that Labour were in power for a good 13 of those years. Yeah. Between 97 and 2010. But whatever, we'll go with it.
I think, though, you have to say, they've set up this department.
Yeah.
And that's a great step forward. And it obviously means they're, making it a priority. And it needs to be a priority.
Well, I dug into this a bit more because I was sceptical when Boris Johnson said that CO2 emissions have come down by 42% since 1990. and it's true.
Oh, wow, okay.
Our UK emissions have come down by, depends, the exact number's kind of hard to track, but somewhere between 38 and 42% the UK emissions have come down by.
Okay.
So,
That's amazing.
That's pretty great, isn't it?
But
Yeah.
it's still not good enough.
I mean, it's a start.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact I didn't even believe it should probably tell you something, because if you hear something like that, among all the bad news about the environment we hear, it's actually quite good.
You'd think that he'd want to scream and shout that a bit
Right,
more, but yeah, great.
So that was a very pleasing highlight, and I was all ready to be like, oh no, Boris is just pulling numbers out of thin air. But actually, credit where it's due, not only did he get that figure right, but for governments of all parties that have been in power since 1990, that's a solid effort, yeah.
Yeah. So touching on, like you said, that environment isn't brought up often, there was a question on the relationship between the UK and Africa in terms of trade. And that was really interesting because that's something that's not brought up.
Honestly, I think this entire PMQs was brilliant because there were so many very different styles of question. Obviously, Boris and Jeremy went off about the NHS between the two of them, and Jeremy Corbyn gets 6 questions, so he could have asked 6 different things if he wanted to. But the range of questions this week was great. It kept me entertained for half an hour anyway.
So what were your main takeaways from the conversation about Africa?
Well, Boris seems very keen, obviously, to promote the UK as in we're going to be free from EU regulations, we can make our own trade deals. And he made it sound, obviously because he was asked about Africa, but he made it sound like there was real interest in going to invest in Africa. And I think, as you quite rightly say, Africa in general, talking about Africa in all forms, be it economic investment or even basic geopolitics, is not mentioned enough in our news, our discourse. In our political discourse. In anything.
Absolutely.
So actually, I was really impressed that the question was asked, and if it's true what he's saying, impressed with his answer.
Well, yeah, he, in response to that question, he said that they will be holding an Africa Investment Summit on the 20th of January, and his response in general to that question was really solid, and you can kind of tell when he knows his stuff on that area because he often pushes it off to one of his front benchers if he doesn't want to respond to it. But with this, he was really, he knew what he was saying, and they've obviously got this summit organised, and yeah, really interesting point. Obviously something for us to follow up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to keep an eye on.
Another main point for me that was interesting, I think, for any young university listeners, was the Erasmus thing that was brought up by Douglas Chapman, an SNP MP. And he was saying about what a shame it would be to lose the Erasmus scheme. And there had been rumours that it was going to be lost in Brexit negotiations. And personally, I think that would be absolutely devastating for people of our generation and people who are following up behind us, because that has given so many opportunities to people to go and, broaden their horizons and experience different cultures. And it's equality of opportunity as well, because this is giving working class students the opportunity to go do that as well, which is something that they might not have ever been able to do. I wouldn't have even considered that. But yeah, and then Boris's response.
So he kind of insulted the SNP MP, told him he was talking out the back of his neck, which isn't an insult I've ever heard before when somebody's been claimed
I might
to be,
start using it
claimed to
against
be
you.
light. Yeah, no, I might give it a trial. He said there is no threat to the Erasmus scheme and we'll continue to participate in it, just as EU students will continue to be able to come to this country.
Okay.
Contrary to a Times report last week that said a Whitehall source, who wasn't named, thought that Erasmus and kind of education with the EU in terms of trade, agreements with the EU afterwards, wasn't really a priority for this government in post-leaving the EU talks, as in the transition period, talks in that transition period. So I don't really know what to make of it.
I don't know if this is just a gap in my knowledge or what, but obviously when we negotiate our relationship with the EU, presumably Schengen's going to be gone.
Yeah.
And we were never fully part of it anyway, but it's going to be wiped off the table completely, free movement between EU countries. So is it going to be like an exemption for studying students, or how is it going to work?
I don't know. I mean, when I went to America on my study abroad, obviously America is different because everybody has to get a visa if you go in there, but there was a special education visa you could get.
Okay.
So, and obviously Boris keeps touting his Australia-style points immigration system with visas and stuff. That was brought up yesterday, on Wednesday as well. I don't know if they're serious about Australian-style points immigration, then you would assume that would apply to the EU as well.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll start seeing educational visas and stuff. I don't know. Maybe. But again, this question was asked quite towards the end of PMQs, and I did get the sense that Boris was kind of just rattling off answers to kind of get through the last 5 minutes, because it was quite a short answer.
But the fact that he did respond in the way that he did gives us hope that it's going to stay in some form. It might not stay in the form as we've seen Erasmus, but in some way.
There is going to be reform, I think.
Yeah.
Obviously, in that entire relationship. Do you trust Boris to keep us in Erasmus?
I don't know really, because I don't think it is a priority of his to keep it. But at the same time, it advances our education system in so many ways that I can't see why he would want to lose it. But
well, both you and I were saying beforehand, before we started recording, weren't we, that we both know so many people who have taken advantage of Erasmus.
So many people who's taken advantage.
Both ways.
Yeah.
I've made friends from abroad who've come here, and made friends when I went abroad, although I went to America. But the point is, like, we all know people who have taken trips to Europe to study for a year. And
they're taking their skills to that country.
Right.
And vice versa, they're bringing their skills to us. But who knows? Anyway, it's not completely written off, which is good news.
One to keep an eye on.
Yeah, one to keep an eye on, definitely. Another point for me that stood out was Robert Halfland's Conservative Harlow MP. He was bringing up about the apprenticeship levy and working class white boys and what the government is doing to help, to stop them from being disenfranchised, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And this is obviously one of my main areas of interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything to do with the working classes. But, I thought this was really interesting, and Boris's response to it as well. Do you want to touch on what he said?
He emphasised the importance of apprenticeships, which I think we've touched on this podcast before.
Yeah,
not everybody takes the university route, obviously.
Yeah, we did.
He said that it was right that the apprenticeship levy be reformed, which is a charge that UK employers have to pay to hire apprentices, which seems ridiculous to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that the Secretary of State Secretary of State for Education will be updating the House whenever they have an idea in mind about what that's going to look like.
Okay.
He agreed in a large part. He seemed to agree with everything everybody said this week, I think, apart from the SNP people, because they keep banging on about Scottish independence. but I got the feeling that Boris and Jeremy Corbyn as well, with some of the shots he took about the NHS. But it's weird watching PMQs now, because Boris seems to agree with things. And obviously this guy, the person who asked this question, is a Conservative MP, but there's a lot more willingness, I find, in Boris to agree or say things like it's important to
take it on board.
Yeah. He said Jeremy Corbyn was right twice in PMQs. And
that doesn't happen.
I don't remember Theresa May ever saying Jeremy Corbyn was right.
No.
Or David Cameron ever saying that. So, yeah. Anyway, but I got a little bit distracted. It's an important point, I think, for Boris, and he made that clear, at least in his words. Mm-hmm. Obviously, actions speaking louder than words, but we'll see where this goes. 'Cause the important thing, I think, to keep an eye on here is that not necessarily in Harlow, but places like Wakefield, the working class areas. I only say that 'cause it's just sat in front of me.
Yeah.
Who voted for Boris now need to see some form of result on their vote.
Definitely.
And if this is one way to do it, because this isn't the first question we've had on working class people, is it? There was one last week as well.
Well, this is the thing. We've had our voices heard more than we have in previous elections. Mm-hmm. So, this is definitely a good point that's been brought up. And it's just a thing that I've been mulling over in my head as, something that could be reported on or looked into. But about, I don't know what it was like in your school, but in my school, there was almost like a 2-tier thing with BTECs and GCSEs, and apprenticeships were kind of seen as like, I don't know, they were kind of seen as, well, you'll do an apprenticeship, but is out going to come of it? Yeah. Is an actual job going to come of it? They were seen as lesser.
Oh, absolutely.
And And not only like we're in a situation where so many working class boys and girls are disenfranchised and feel like they have no goals or whatever, and we've got this apprenticeship system put in place, and then that apprenticeship system is looked down on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what effects is that having on these people who take that route or are considering taking that route? Because I think a lot of people who've even got the slightest glimmer of maybe academic achievement, are pushed into the university route, and that's wrong.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. The university is not for everyone.
You should be taking and nurturing people's vocational skills, and that's what this country is lacking.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We are going to see a massive skill shortage soon if people don't appreciate.
Well, this is the interesting thing. People are going to have to, because we're going to have less EU workers coming in and providing these skills. People are going to have to get off the backsides, and the government is going to have to nurture people to fill in these gaps.
Is this Grace's wake-up call to the nation?
Yes, come on, people, get up, stand up, rise up.
Yeah, rise up.
No, but genuinely, I think that we're going to have to see a massive push on vocational skills, and in turn, it's going to have a great effect on working class communities.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I hope that this government does this.
Yeah,
it's in their interest to do it, but
it is.
Any other comments that you want to make?
I hope PMQs carries on like this, to be honest. Especially like this week. This week was great. In case people haven't already realised what I think of this week's PMQs.
He loves it. He loves it.
Honestly,
can't get enough.
I watch it again.
He's transcribed the whole thing.
You're not joking. I've taken 2,000 words of notes.
Literally.
Sat here scrolling through it on my laptop.
But I think PMQs, especially this week, maybe not so much last week, but it's becoming less theatrical.
Yeah. Just as we start this podcast.
Yeah.
Purely because of how theatrical PMQs was.
Yeah, it's becoming less...
Our gap in the market is closing.
It's always been considered not very informative and not very, just theatre, effectively.
Absolutely, yeah.
But now I think we're getting some solid discussion, which is great.
You know why it is? It's because the new speaker can't shout very loud, so they can't drown him out by constantly baiting each other.
Order. Anyway, this has been a great podcast this week, I think.
I think it's been great,
because we have some quality material to go off.
No, there's been a lot of decent stuff this week.
So we can hope for the best next week as well. So
Fingers
we hope
crossed.
that you will be joining us next week to go over PMQs again, your highlights, your best bits, and if anyone enjoys or listens to this podcast, please let us know. We'd love some feedback.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I've been Grace.
And I've been Jack.
And we will see you next week.
This is the Out of Order podcast, cutting through the political chat.